welcome back to my read-along of A Tale of Stars and Shadow. Today we're up to chapter 26 and I'm going to dive right in. Okay. Things were not going well. As quick as a flash, the morale that Talyn had slowly and painstakingly been nurturing amongst the wolves vanished as if it had never been. They began dragging their feet during the morning run and strength exercises. Weapons training was half-hearted at best, and nobody seemed to care. Theak tried to whip them into shape, but not even his heart was in it. She pushed them as strongly as she knew how, but all this won her was a grudging few hours of activity. She despaired. She'd been so close to winning them over, and now it was all gone. They had been improving. They'd begun to have some pride in themselves. Now that fledgling pride had been ripped out from under them, and their spirits and self-esteem were worse than when she'd first met them. They saw the coming monsoon festival only as a chance for the winged folk to ridicule and humiliate them. Talyn struggled to see a way out of it. No matter how she approached them, barking orders, gently cajoling, or simple reasoning, she couldn't get them to respond to her. Days passed, and their progress halted entirely. She was at a complete loss. With all her attempts to reignite the morale of the wolves failing, and Kuan refusing to take a protective guard seriously, she'd effectively become useless. Worse, she felt useless, and like a failure. Without the wing to focus on, to keep her grief and depression at bay, she struggled. Proper sleep returned to being almost impossible, and she spent long hours of the night wide awake and trying not to dwell on the past. It didn't help that she was in such an unfamiliar environment. Back home, warriors took pride in themselves and what they did, and nobody had to cajole them into it. At home, the king and his family, her family, didn't treat their people like they were there for their own amusement. She struggled to understand, to deal with how things were in Mithrena. More than once she considered writing a letter to the First Shield, to explain the situation and request reassignment back home. Each time the flicker of hope that thought roused died quickly. Sienna already doubted her, and she couldn't afford the King Shield thinking she was broken. She couldn't have them find out how lost she actually was. And even if she had a good excuse, to fail on her first posting, no, that would raise doubts and questions beyond just Sienna. Sometimes in her darkest moments, she wondered if that would be such a bad thing. Maybe she should just accept that she was no longer able to be a warrior and leave the King Shield, leave it all behind. But what else was there for her? A blank space yawned, a space that terrified her to the very core of her being. Because even though she didn't know how to get back to what she'd been, she was warrior born. There was nothing else for her. 2 weeks after Mithanas delivered the Leia invitation, she was called to Ravania's office late in the afternoon. It was the first time she'd seen him since their discussion about the palace break-in. "Captain," Ravania rose from behind his desk to greet her. "Please take a seat." "Sir?" She took the chair before his desk, curious, despite herself. "You've been here almost 3 months today, Captain," he said briskly. "You remember the task I gave you?" She shifted, crossed her legs. "Yes, sir. You wanted an active wing ready to perform guard duty. You presented well at the Queen's dinner, and your wing handled the intrusion into the Citadel better than I had expected," he said. "You can be assured I don't intend to hold the fact that Prince Kuan refuses to have a permanent guard against you." This was odd. Was Ravania praising her? She tried not to frown in confusion. "Thank you, sir." "From what I can see, your men are on their way to becoming professional guards," he continued briskly. "I thought we should discuss deployment and resources a little further." "Sir," she hesitated, then made a quick decision to be frank. He was her commanding officer after all. "While I would be appreciative of more specific direction from you, you should be aware that their training has stalled. I'm doing my best, but they are refusing to cooperate beyond the most basic instruction." Ravania's mouth tightened. The Alea game. "Yes, sir." He sat back in his chair, gaze steady on hers. "If your wing is refusing to cooperate with your command, Captain, I'm sure you're aware of your options." "I am, sir, but I'm reluctant to see 4 good men dispatched back to the Dock City cells because of their unwillingness to be publicly humiliated." "Your frankness is unwise, Captain." The words were delivered sharply, and before she'd even finished speaking, but she got the distinct impression it was more from a desire for her to stop speaking than genuine anger at her words. "Sir," she bowed her head. "I am willing for you to see things through until after the game," he said eventually. "If you cannot turn the situation around afterwards, then they will go back to the cells. Is that clear?" He nodded. She straightened, unable to hide her relief. "Thank you, sir." He nodded, face and tone turning back to business. I spoke to the Queen, who has counselled a patient approach where Prince Kuan is concerned. From now on, it has been agreed that your wing will form a guard detail every time there is an official occasion such as a dinner or a ceremony. You'll also guard Prince Kuan any time he leaves the Citadel. And the rest of the time? She raised an eyebrow. As I said, a patient approach has been agreed. We will build beyond that, but for now you'll need to stick within those parameters. Thank you, sir. It was a positive development, and it brought about a slight easing of the tight ball of anxiety that seemed to sit constantly in her chest. If she'd won this much in 3 months, maybe there was hope she could achieve a full-time guard before the end of her posting. At least then she'd go home with a member of the Genarix family properly secured. After all, that was the sole aim of the King's Shield. Good. He picked up a sheaf of parchment and passed it across to her. Those are the resource request forms. Anything your wing needs, fill one out and give it to my clerk outside. If I approve the request, he will see that you get what you need. Yes, sir, she couldn't help adding. And he would be the falcon sitting outside there that gives me a contempt-filled look every time I walk in here? His name is Fierce Grasswing. Ravanier cleared his throat. I meet weekly with all wing captains, and I expect you to be at those meetings from now on. I'll require a progress report on the week, and we'll discuss any security concerns that exist. Any questions? No, sir. She squelched the urge to ask if she should expect similar treatment from his captains as she received from his clerk. He smiled slightly. Dismissed. Thank you, sir. Dusk had fallen by the time she left Ravanier, and her wandering feet took her past the royal pool. It was deserted, so she took the opportunity to stand at the railing and watch the fiery sunset over Feather Bay. Despite the beauty of the sight, looking down on it from the palace left her unsettled, uncomfortable with the way winged folk used everything, even their home and architecture, to look down on those in Dock City. Leaving the palace, she made the long walk down into the city, where the bustle of human life made her feel much closer to home. The night markets were on, a once-a-fortnight event Corrin had encouraged her to attend, in the market quarter, but she was in no mood for the crowds already thronging the streets. Instead, she turned in the opposite direction. She had no particular location in mind, but when she passed a well-lit inn close to the boundary of Dock Quarter, the music and conversation of its patrons spilling out onto the street, she turned and went inside. Talyn rarely turned to alcohol to numb her despair. It never made her feel better for more than a snatch of hours, and would usually make her depression worse after that. But tonight she wanted to watch from the outside as those around her, normal people, enjoyed their evenings the way she once had. Hardly anyone glanced her way as she ordered at the bar, then snagged a small table in the corner, her back to the wall, facing the crowded room. The spirits were fiery on her tongue as she tossed back 2 quick shots, before sipping more slowly through the others she brought. It wasn't a large place, but clearly popular. Light music drifted through the room from a handful of musicians near the door. The inn wasn't far from the docks, and many of tonight's patrons looked to be sailors and dock workers. Talyn worked her way slowly through the drinks, ordered another when a server came by, content to simply sit and watch and do her best not to remember. A couple of men, and one woman with striking platinum hair, tried approaching her, but a quick, well-practiced look had them stumbling away without even speaking. Even if there had been no Tarkos, she wasn't interested in that sort of company tonight. Her father had probably once frequented an inn just like this. He might have even come to this one before. It made her wonder again what his life had been like here, what his experience of the winged folk contempt for humans had been. Had that been why he'd left to captain his own ship? She didn't understand why he'd never mentioned it. Sari's voice roused. Maybe it's why he fell in love with your mother so quickly. It must have been quite the experience to meet a princess who actually cared about her people. Maybe. I wish I'd gotten a chance to speak to him about my posting before I left. Sari's disapproval was clear enough that Talyn pushed her away before she could say anything. Talyn hadn't gone home after Sari's death, had lingered, lost, in Port Lithely for a few weeks, seeing nobody, before abruptly leaving to go to Ryathel. There she'd handed in her resignation at Cullinan Tower before signing up for the King's Shield. Seeing her parents had seemed an impossible task. She loved them dearly, but they would know at once how badly rooted she truly was, and she hadn't been able to handle anyone knowing that. So she'd sought the comfort of her relatives instead, those who didn't know her as well, but took her in without question. Talyn cleared her throat, dragging herself out of her musings with a long swallow of the ale that had just been placed at her elbow. She forced her attention back to the present, to the lives carrying on around her. When another man tried approaching her, sliding onto the low stool opposite her before she even knew he was coming, Her hand was on her side before he'd settled into place. "I found you this time," he observed. "It wasn't hard." The Shadowhawk. Her heart pounded with a mix of shock and self-disgust at her failure to notice his approach. "You followed me," she said flatly. He gave a low chuckle. "Not to harm you, so you can take your hand off your weapon." A high collar and the shadows of the corner of the room hid most of his features, but she remembered the tangled brown hair and stubbled jaw. A man who looked no different than any street criminal who'd seen too many years of hard living. Except he didn't look that old. Mid-30s at best. It was an odd dissonance. She lifted her hand away from the sigh and took a sip of her drink, deliberately slow. "So this is just a social call?" "I don't do those. I wanted to check in." He shifted closer as someone passed by behind his chair. "Interesting. You're a sword hanging over my neck, Captain Dynan. And you've ably demonstrated that I should be careful about lowering that sword." Was he really here to ensure she'd been appropriately warned off by his threat? No, she sensed some other purpose. The Cassidy First Blade hadn't yet responded to her letter with further instructions, but old habits had her leaning into this conversation, using it to wring every piece of information she could out of it. "Something tells me that were I to really sneak into your room at night intending harm, you'd have one of those oversized forks buried in my throat before I even realized what was happening." Once, yes. Now, she wasn't so sure. Her edge was gone. She made no response, taking another sip of the fiery spirit, wanting to draw him out. The more he spoke, the more she could learn. "Is that a hint of doubt, Captain Dynan?" he murmured, reading her silence far too accurately for comfort. "From what I hear, you're a born warrior, the best of the best." "Well, you're a born criminal?" She lifted an eyebrow. "Such a blunt and uncompromising term," he murmured. "I do what I can to help those who need it, and I don't let arbitrary and unjust laws stop me. Where I come from, that's called being a criminal, no matter how pretty your intentions." His mouth curled. "Why did you leave the Cassidy?" She took a slow breath to hide how his question got under her guard, and shifted back on her stool, resting casually against the wall behind. "You have some sort of skin rash or extra sensitivity to contact?" "What?" he blurted, thoroughly taken aback by her question. She smiled inwardly. "I can't help but notice how you shy away the moment anyone passes near the table. You did it the night we met too, kept shifting your feet to keep me from getting too close." He laughed softly. "It's a hazard of living in the poor quarter, I'm afraid. I get twitchy when people get too close." A good answer, and given naturally. Still, she didn't quite buy it. "Why are you here?" "I heard about the Alea game. It tells me something about you, Captain Dynan. It tells me you're not here in Mithrena at the Prince of Night's behest." And why is that an important distinction, she wondered. "I'm here at the behest of my commanding officer and nobody else." He laughed softly. "And you're too smart to believe something so simplistic. You've been here long enough to see how things work." "Perhaps. Why do you care about the Alea game?" "I told you, I do what I can to help the humans." His voice turned dark, intense. It had an edge of almost madness to it. "The game is an opportunity to humiliate your wing, and by extension, the human population." She searched his face, looking for the emotion that went with that bitter voice, and failing to find it. He was a master at hiding himself. "Why?" "Why what?" "Why care so much about the humans?" "Someone has to." A glib response. He wasn't going to give her anything she could use against him. She stayed silent, waiting him out. Eventually he sat back. "If you're as good as I hear, the game might go differently than they expect." She couldn't help the smile that rose up in her at his words. He was the first person in Mithrena to even consider that fact, and it told her something about him too. He was smart, and he knew more about her than he should. Where was he getting his information from? "It might," she acknowledged. "I've never heard of the game before, but I have certain abilities." "I'd like to see that." A smile flashed, genuine and bright, but then faded as quickly as it had come. "You win that game for them, and a target will be on your back, Captain. The elder princes won't take a loss from humans lightly, and the youngest has no power or desire to help you." Surprise flashed through her, and she sat forward, once again trying and failing to read his shadowy features. "Did you come here tonight to warn me?" "I've heard about you, Captain. I've heard how you treat your men with respect, how you treat them like they're worth something. You stand with them." "Don't drag me into your crusade," she said, ignoring the passion in his words that tugged at her. Their voices had dropped, and they were both leaning over the table now, faces inches apart. "I'm King Shield and Calumian, and I am only here to protect Prince Kewin." "You could have fooled me." His eyes searched hers. "And you could have had me killed or arrested any time since you found me. Why haven't you?" "Because I don't take action that has significant consequences unless I'm certain of where I stand. Not anymore. Never again. You are a criminal. You're also the reason Dock City residents now have some of the seeds they need to grow their produce," she said. "But don't mistake me. If you become a threat to Kuan, you won't live longer than it takes for me to bury this sigh in your neck." Something happened to you. He was unfazed by her threat. Something that led the finest Callanan of her generation to leave and join the Kingshield to be a lowly guard. A Dumnorix princess to boot. And now you're here, and I don't know why. Neither do I. The words were on the tip of her tongue, and she was shocked at herself for how close she came to saying them aloud. Instead she countered, pushing back at him. "Why the lightning? You think it looks cool? Strikes fear into the heart of your enemies?" He laughed softly, without mirth. "Quite the opposite. It represents how fleeting my help is, Captain. What I do is bright, vivid, breaking the hopelessness the humans feel for an instant. And then it's gone as quick as it came, and the darkness returns." She had nothing to say to that. He nodded, sat back, and stood up. "Think about what I said. I don't want to see your wing humiliated any more than you do, but you're of more use to them alive and safe." "You truly believe the princess would do something to me?" Incredulity filled her voice. "I'm an official liaison of the Twin Thrones. Accidents happen, particularly when Kingshield are so far from home." His voice hardened. "And yes, Captain, I truly believe Prince Mathanas would come for you. He doesn't take insult well, and he's an angry and powerful man. You were right before. You're an outsider. You don't yet understand fully how things work here." She stayed at the table once he was gone, steadily drinking her way through her remaining glasses. The spirits didn't give her the numbness she'd been seeking. Her chat with the Shadowhawk had left her oddly energized. He was more than a criminal, and it was clear he truly believed in what he was doing. How he'd described his lightning symbol. But there was nothing, not even a trace, of why the Callanan were so interested in him they asked a Kingshield to breach their self-imposed mandate of only protecting the Dumnorix. Sari roused. "That's my second question. The first is why Kuan's existence is so secretive. Sienna was pretending like he was doing the First Blade a favor by sending you here. Why not just tell everyone he found another Dumnorix? Send a whole battalion of Kingshield here who could spy for the Callanan in their spare time." She tried to ignore Sari, turning to the Shadowhawk's warning over in her mind. While she didn't quite believe anyone would come after her if her presence meant the wolves won the game, it certainly wouldn't help her standing. And if the royal family were to find out she was Dumnorix, that wouldn't be a good look at all. And yet... Maybe the answer to your first question has something to do with what the Shadowhawk just implied. Maybe Sienna is trying to keep it secret from everyone here. Before Sari could reply, she dismissed the topic in her head. Her defensive words to the Shadowhawk had been spot on. She'd done as the Callanan had asked. No doubt the extra information she'd given them on his identity would lessen their interest in him. Now her only job was to keep Kuan safe for the remainder of her posting, no matter where or from whom any threats came. She toyed with her final glass. She'd spoken to Kuan in anger when she told him that a leader had to be worthy of those that followed, but she'd meant every word. And by letting the wolves get the best of her, by letting them give up, she was essentially giving up on them. Her fingers curled around the warm glass and she tossed the spirits back before slamming the glass down on the surface and rising to her feet. She was a Dumnorix. More than that, she was a warrior. She would get this ring into shape. It would be the last thing she did. And maybe in the process, she could fix herself. She rose early so that she could visit a small drink stand she'd found not far from the palace entrance and order a large cup of carvy, not missing the grimace of distaste tossed her way by the winged woman there, also ordering a drink. It took her a moment to remember Corrin's words about carvy being a human-only drink, and by then the woman had moved on, so Talyn shrugged it off and headed down to the barracks. The wolves were already there, going through warm-ups with their typical level of apathy. Keeping face and voice calm, she stretched while they completed their warm-ups and then joined them on the run down the wall and back. Once they were back at the barracks, she allowed them a few moments of hunched-over panting. "Right," she ordered. "Stop what you're doing and get over here." They trudged listlessly over to where she stood. All were sweating and red-faced. She buried her frustration at their apathy and kept her voice firm but not unkind. "We're having a different training session today. It's hot and we're going to go get a cool drink. Talyn, take us somewhere nice, please, out of the palace and where we won't run into any falcons." Barely a murmur. Not even the prospect of escape from their usual arduous training roused any interest in the wolves. That was fine. Talyn led them out of the barracks and through the citadel to an open-aired cafe that stretched out from a larger building clinging to the hillside. For her own peace of mind, she didn't dwell on how exactly the thing was held up. Something about the decided way in which Talyn led them told her he'd come to this place before, possibly as a refuge from life at the palace. While pretty as everything else in the citadel, the cafe didn't look fine or exclusive enough to be a spot nobles would choose to dine at. Not that she minded. It was nice to be away from the gloriously dressed nobles or wingguards she also always saw around the palace. The sight of Talyn prompted the almost instant appearance of the cafe's winged owner, another indication of the status of Talyn's family, and they exchanged a few words before the owner led them outside to a table along the railed edge of the platform. A brightly coloured shade cloth shielded them from the heat of the sun, and all around drifted snatches of birdsong from treetops directly below. Given the early hour, there weren't many patrons, and they had privacy. For a moment, Talyn simply sat there, neck slightly craned as she looked upwards to the tiers of buildings and walkways in the hillside above her, the group of winged folk flying between balconies, a hint of music from somewhere to the east. Sun gleamed on the creamy marble and picked out the hints of rich colour in the wings of those drifting by. Pretty, isn't it? Theak's surly voice broke the silence. She lowered her gaze, giving him a shrug rather than biting on his attempt to bait her. It certainly is, Theak. A human waiter soon followed them out, carrying a tray of cold drinks. Talyn took hers gratefully, sipping the sweet, cold liquid with pleasure. It wasn't as good as Kavi, but tasted fruity and sweet. Zamaral stared at his like it was poison, but the other three humans reached for theirs with varying degrees of reluctance. So what? She said. Kavi is a human-only drink, but whatever this is, it's just for the winged folk? Talyn rolled his eyes. It's not like it's a rule. We don't generally have enough fruit down in Dock City for frivolous drinks like this, Corin said quietly. Right. She wasn't interested in another debate of the unfairness of human versus winged folk in Mithrana, and it wasn't why she'd brought them here. Before any of the others could chime in, she changed the subject. When is the Alea match being held? Late 6th month, Talyn offered when nobody else seemed willing to respond. Well, you're all going to get your backsides whipped, aren't you? 5 pairs of eyes shot to her, glaring in mute indignation. She fought back a smile, instead summoning the sharpest tone she could manage. Don't look at me like that. Of course you're going to get beaten. You've been doing nothing for the past 2 weeks but whine like babies. We're going to lose because the winged folk want us to lose. How are humans ever going to beat falcons in a game of Alea? They can fly, Zamaral spoke bitterly, but she counted that as an improvement. He hadn't said a word to her in 3 days. They have magic, Captain. You're making a lot of assumptions there. Talyn sat back in her chair, deliberately keeping a relaxed, casual posture. But before I go into that, can one of you explain to me what exactly Alea is? Corin's head came up. You've never played it? I've never even heard of it. There are 5 players from each team on the field at one time. You can use any open space, but the festival game is held in the great amphitheatre in the middle of the citadel, Talyn explained. There's a goal at each end, and the aim is to get a round ball into your goal. Your team gets 1 point for each goal. She frowned. That sounds simple. Halun and Talyn rolled their eyes at each other before Talyn continued. It's not. Each player is allowed a weapon, blunted of course, and essentially you can use any method to stop the other team's players from scoring, including magic. You can't stray outside the bounds of the field, you can't tack an opponent's head, and you can't inflict serious injury. But those are really the only rules. She sat up in her chair, staring at them in surprise. You're telling me this game is basically a mock battle, with the added wrinkle of getting a ball into a hole? When the Falcons play, Theak glowered, down in Dock City we use brooms and buckets and throwing slings. It's more of a fun scrap than a battle. And what happens if you break any of those rules? She asked. The ball goes to the other team. Corin scratched an imaginary speck on the tabletop. She paused for a moment then. How many winged folk do you know who have learned Sabai? Silence. You've been learning it for the past 3 months. That is going to be your advantage over Prince Azralan's falcons. They can fly and use magic. You know Cullinan unarmed combat. It's not quite as simple as that, Theak chided. We're barely past the basics. Maybe, but at the very least you can put up a good fight. I know you have the ability to do that. We have roughly 6 weeks to the end of 6 months, right? She waited for their grudging nods before continuing. From now on, we'll drop sword drills in the morning 3 times a week and spend it learning Sabai instead. Talyn looked at them all in the eye. I can make you good enough to surprise them at the very least. But to do that, I need you to trust me and I need you to buy in. Will you give me that? You keep asking us to trust you, Captain, Zamril said, but you don't understand what you're asking of us. You don't know what it's like to be human in Mithrana. No, she said evenly, but I also think you're using the bad circumstances you find yourselves in as an excuse to not even try, and I won't accept that. A brief moment of silence then. She asked me to trust her, and I did, and look what happened for my mam and sisters, Corrin said, fixing his green eyes on Zamril. You say you're the best thief in Dock City? Well, prove it. You'll be nothing but a laughingstock if we back out of this game because we're scared. Talyn stared at Corrin in astonishment, but he didn't notice. His determined gaze was fixed on the thief. For his part, Zamril looked lost, as if he wanted to take the hope Corrin was offering, but didn't believe in himself enough to do it. Boy's got a point, Theak added gruffly, his gaze fixing on hers. But so has Zamril. You're offering us something you don't fully understand, and if you're wrong, we'll never be Prince Kieran's guard. A humiliated group of humans won't be respected or feared by anyone meaning the prince harm. You know that, Captain. She did. But what else was there to do? Mathanas had placed them in an impossible situation, a checkmate move. And if that happens, you go back to the cells. I understand. But it would also mean that she'd failed. Without a wing, she'd be on the first ship back home. But I don't see how not trying helps you any. At least my way you give yourselves a chance, albeit a small one. I'm not afraid of falcons, Halun spoke up unexpectedly in his quiet, cultured voice. But that doesn't mean I think we can win. And no offense, Captain, but pretty words won't help. I'm not promising you a victory, she said steadily. I'm promising you a way to do this without being utterly humiliated. You give the falcons a good fight and lose, they can't laugh at you. I think you'd be surprised, Tierslon said darkly, but then lifted his gaze to all of them. But that doesn't matter. And I played a lot of Alea when I was young. We're not entirely without winged folk here. Zamril, please. Remember what I told you about courage, Talyn pleaded with the thief. His face was hard, and he had completely withdrawn back into himself. Finally he nodded, but he refused to meet her gaze. Back to training then. Theak rose to his feet, looking at Talyn with raised eyebrows. Perhaps we can do an extra session on Sabai this afternoon. She deliberately lagged behind the others as they headed back to the barracks, giving Theak a look so that he matched her slowing pace. Can you give me any insight as to why Prince Mathanas has done this? She asked in an undertone. It still nagged at her what the Shadowhawk had said about the eldest prince, about her not being in Mithrana at his behest. He wants you gone, and he wants us filthy humans out of his palace, Theak muttered. Right, but why? Talyn pressed. We're no threat to him, and it would be easy for him to just ignore us. If I understood his motivations, I might be able to figure out a way to get us out of this. Theak gave her a look. I'm a human from Dock City. I don't know why you think I have any insight into the motivations of the Prince of Night. He huffed a breath at her pointed glance. Fine. I'm betting it's got to do with the Queen's heir. Mathanas wants it to be him. That's no secret. This game gives him an easy opportunity to thoroughly humiliate his youngest brother, and in the process remove any potential competition. The winged nobles will never put their weight behind such a weak prince, and neither will the Queen. I thought Prince Kuan was already essentially out of the running. He is, but that doesn't mean Prince Mathanas won't take any opportunity to re-emphasize how unworthy a candidate Prince Kuan is. And Prince Azralan? I truly don't know that one, Captain. He's always stuck close to Mathanas, the very picture of brotherly devotion. This was getting off track. She stopped dead, leaving the others to walk on. Theak, there was a time when I could face 5 falcons and take them down without breaking a sweat. You and I both know they're ceremonial, all style over substance. And don't forget I have magic too. If I play, we win. You're too experienced not to know that already, so why are you just as downbeat as the rest of them? Sari roused. You haven't actually seen the falcons use their magic. Don't underestimate them. Magic is simply another weapon, Sari, and I've seen them in drill. They don't fight with any purpose, any heart, and their skill isn't any more than basic competence. It won't be any different with their magic. Theak's sharp words took her away from any response Sari made. Because if you walk out there and single-handedly destroy 5 falcons, you will do to Prince Azralan what he and Prince Mathanas are trying to do to Prince Kuan. What then do you think our chances of remaining here will be? His words echoed that of the Shadowhawk. Interesting. Both men knew Mithranan society far better than she ever would, but even so she struggled to truly believe what they were saying. She stepped back from him, letting out a long breath. Theak, my one and only goal here is to build a protective guard capable of keeping Prince Kuan safe before I leave. This Alea game is an opportunity. I can train you all up well enough in 6 weeks so that you can give a good accounting of yourselves without my help, and at the same time forge them into an even stronger team. With me there, we ensure a victory, even if we have to make it appear like a difficult one to save everyone's face. And you seem to think that telling us this, that offering us hope via inspiring words is going to change anything for us, Captain. Frustration tinged his voice. We've lived here our entire lives. We've dealt with wingfolk contempt our entire lives. Nothing has ever changed that. So why is it so difficult for you to understand that it's impossible for us to believe what you're saying? Our reality proves you wrong. He strode ahead before she could respond, his words hitting her like a punch to the stomach. He's right. I goddamn know that, Talyn seethed. But if I can't change anything, why am I even here? I didn't say you couldn't change anything, Sari said. You bloody Denarics can't help yourselves. It's just that you'll have to show them, not tell them. The crippling doubt hit her again. It was so much easier to say the words and have faith she could carry them out. And her conversation with the wolves just now had made something terrifyingly clear. She needed to succeed here to prove to herself that she wasn't done, that she could go back to what she was. But now she realized it wasn't just her life, it was theirs. Steer them wrong, fail them, and they would go back to the cells in which she'd found them, their lives over too. The weight of that burden was stifling. You're as bad as they are, Sari said in a huff, before vanishing from her mind completely. Okay, well that was a lengthy chapter, but we've reached the end of chapter 26. As always, here's your point to jump out if you want to avoid any spoilers in my author commentary. And if you are jumping out here, it's been a pleasure. I hope you enjoyed it, and I really look forward to seeing you for the next chapter. Otherwise, stick around and let's have a little bit of chat about this quite long chapter. Okay, let's talk about chapter 26. So it's a pretty flat and despairing opening to this chapter. Talyn is reflecting on her recent work with the wolves and essentially how apathetic and despairing they've become since the announcement of the Alea match, and the expectation that when that happens they'll be completely humiliated by Prince Azralang's Falcon team in the game, and that the human population will be there to witness that, and it will be essentially like grinding them into the dust in front of everyone in Mithrina. That's meant that they're pretty apathetic in training. They're still showing up. They're doing what she asks them to do, but they're not doing it with any effort or heart. And she has kind of lost the momentum that she had with them before that announcement. That has the obvious impact on Talyn and her own spirits and her own resilience that was kind of starting to kick up, was starting to improve. She was starting to get that spark of life back working with the wolves, but this apparent failure has now sent her reeling a little bit to feel like she's now failing and that she hasn't really done anything in the 3 months she's been there that she could consider a marker of success apart from finding the Shadowhawk. So in that kind of very glum mood, she heads down to Dock City one night with the intention of sitting in one of the lively taverns, listening to the music, watching people go about their lives and just trying to find that connection back to the life I think that she used to have and that she still yearns for, at least kind of vicariously watching others' happiness or simple enjoyment of an ale and some music at the end of a long day. But the Shadowhawk finds her there and they have this quite charged conversation. Again, as the author, I got to drop some really cool little tidbits if you're paying attention here. She picks up pretty quickly that he constantly is shifting in his chair anytime someone gets near, and that's of course because this is Kewan. His big wings are at his back, hidden by his cloak, and while the glamour hides them from sight, if someone was to run into those wings, that would be pretty clear what they were. And so this chapter is told, or this interaction is told from Talyn's perspective, but throughout that whole conversation in Kewan's mind must have been that kind of simmering unease of like, if someone gets too close, I'm going to get found out, but I really need to have this conversation with Talyn. And he's there to warn her. He's there to warn her that he's worked out for himself, knowing what he knows of Talyn through from Zamaral, but also from Narvis, that she's an incredibly capable warrior, and he's very quickly worked out that means if she plays in the Alea game, the wolves will win. She probably single-handedly could take on 5 falcons, as she later says to Theak. She's barely breaking a sweat in doing that. So he's come to warn her that if she does that, that's basically as bad as if she didn't play and the wolves were humiliated, because Prince Mathanas and Prince Aslan would not take well to that, and the Shadowhawk warns that her life might very well be in danger, which Talyn finds incredibly hard to believe, but she does take his warning as sincere, and they're kind of very intense, charged conversation where she's trying to learn more about him through their conversation. Leaves her feeling a little bit more energized, and some of that kind of despair that was weighing her down before that interaction is lifted a little bit, and she goes back to bed that night with a little bit of renewed resolve and thinking, right, we've got to crack through this despair with the wolves, which she has a really good crack at the next day, taking them to their cafe and kind of trying to instill some pride in them and trying to instill some hope. But Thea makes a really good point after that conversation, is that this is their entire lives. Nothing has ever changed, not once in their lives. And Talyn, speaking to them as she is, even though it's from the heart and even though it's very sincere, from their perspectives, isn't going to change anything. If they win the match, it's bad. If they lose the match, it's bad. That's what it's like to be a human in Mithrena with the winged folk ruling. And she hears that and kind of makes her despair as well, which irritates the heck out of Sari right at the end of the chapter. But this is a really tough spot for Talyn to be in. I mean, her resilience coming to Mithrena was already extremely low. Her pride and self-esteem was really low. She thought she was getting somewhere, and this is a massive step backwards. So for her to kind of keep pushing forward at this point is an incredible effort that she doesn't necessarily feel like she's up to. But we will see how that eventuates in the next few chapters. If you have any questions and comments on this one, please drop them in the comments below. Please consider liking and subscribing, and click that little notification bell so you get updates when these are dropped. Otherwise, I can't wait to see you in chapter 27. Have a great day.